Salvete Discipula. I hope your week is going okay. So you can watch it. I want you to watch this video before you take your quiz. So that's why it's on top of the form instead of like at the bottom of it. But yeah, please actually go through this before you take your quiz. I want to make sure you guys are actually prepared for this one. I was fortunately really late with grading the last one, so I will that won't happen again. I'll have the one you're taking today graded by the end of next week at the latest, so we can go over it. But you need to know these endings, so that's important. I'll come back to that, and you need to know that vocab, right? I'll show you the lectiones again at the end of this. But the main thing I want to do in this, besides motivate you guys to make sure you're really prepared for the quiz, is actually check the two translations on the last quiz. All right, so this one, there was a lot of issues with this one, and I don't blame you guys. This approach, teaching online, it's a totally uncharted waters for us, and it can be very difficult. For some of you, maybe it's working out. Like you're the exact kind of learner that works well with this approach. But for a lot of us, I mean, this is totally new, and I mean, obviously, even for the teachers, we're not used to this either. So that is all just to say that I don't blame you guys for struggling with some of the new grammar because I mean Latin's hard always, so it might potentially be harder now. But please do feel very free to schedule Zoom sessions on Tuesdays or Thursdays. They can be real quick. They can be 10, 20 minutes if you want. If you just want to check over something and kind of touch base and make sure you're actually aware of the grammar that's being introduced. Okay, so this one. I like this one because the relative clause is all the way at the end. So quas poeta recitabat. I sense maybe some of you guys still aren't quite understanding the significance of these relative clauses and understanding how to kind of separate them out from the main clause. So I really do want you guys to get into the habit of circling them or underlining them. And the way to identify them is that they usually are starting with one of these qui, qui, quads, right? So any of those forms you see down there's too many of them. It is kind of hard to keep track of all of them, but their endings are actually pretty familiar. I say that as a Latin teacher, but they should remind us of endings we've seen before in their given cases. Hopefully, so this quas is an accusative for one thing. That as ending, that's the same as ending as it's been since we've had the first declension. So that is the direct object of the relative clause. And so yeah, this one is easy to tell where the relative clause begins and ends, starting with quas and ending at the end of the sentence, obviously. But say it was in the middle of a sentence, you're gonna go from the qui qui quad and you're gonna keep going right until you hit another verb. And that first verb you hit after moving right from the relative clause, that's the end of your relative clause. And so it's its own little unit. And I mean, you often have to translate them together, but as in kind of like at the same time. But in this case, where they're on two separate sides of the sentence, we actually can kind of approach them separately. It gets tricky, as you'll see in the next one, when the relative clause is smack dab in the middle of the sentence. So yeah, the main clause of this, hopefully, that is not difficult for you guys. A lot of you did pretty well with that. So it's just many listeners, multi auditores, feared or were fearing to Maybot is imperfect. Okay, I'll actually just flip ahead. A lot of people are still getting perfect and imperfect mixed up. I would love to set up a Zoom session where we just really kind of drill verb endings again. Um, but try to remember back in year one when you guys were sixth graders, we got the imperfect endings pretty early on in the year, maybe like right before Christmas or something, and that's the bomb boss bot. So try to think of imperfect as the tense we got year one Latin, bomb boss bot, a lot of BAs in there, and we translate that as was or were verbing or verbed. And then we got perfect this year, right? At the beginning of this year, we got the perfect tense. And those are different. They do not have BA in them. You can translate them as verbed. So the translation isn't so much the issue because either if it's imperfect or perfect, you can translate it as verbed. But if I'm asking about the tense on the translation quiz, which I did a lot, that's where people are missing out on points. Um, So yeah, I don't have a good mnemonic. If anybody wants to email me a great mnemonic for how we can connect the word imperfect with BA, I wish there was a BA in imperfect. I don't know, or like just like a good way we could kind of connect those in our minds. But anyway, so that was one thing a lot of people missed out on. I was super lenient grading this one, obviously. But if your grade still, it's in Power School. If you still think it's too low, we can work out some kind of makeup or something like that. But yeah, I'm dwelling on that all of a sudden because I'm remembering how many of you guys were telling me to Maybot was perfect. Both of these verbs are imperfect. All right. Either way, we can translate them as verb. But yeah, okay. All to say, this main clause, pretty simple, right? Many listeners fear the fierce satires. That's it. Many subjects verbed the fierce direct objects. But then Quas is going to tell us more about those satires. All right. So we use which or that because satires are not a person. So we wouldn't say who because then if we used who, it sounds like maybe we're talking about the listeners. And maybe you're thinking like, how do we even know what the Quas is referring to? How do we tell? It is agreeing in gender and number. So they actually are both accusative, quas and the satires. But relative clauses don't have to be the same case as the thing they're referring to. They do, though, have to be the same gender and the same number. So both of these are feminine plural. All right, that as ending is feminine plural accusative a lot of the times. We do have those pesky third declension words like veritas and cupiditas that end in as in the nominative, and that's super, super annoying, but this is good old like first declension style accusative plural. So that's one way to tell. I'm not sure what the gender of auditores is. So let's see. I don't think it's feminine. If it is, it'd be pretty tricky because then Quas almost could be listening to referring to the listeners. But anyway, um, there's usually the relative clause is relatively close, no pun intended, to the antecedent, right? That's what I'm actually talking about here, the antecedent. So the antecedent, it's a horrible word. It's one of those grammatical terms that just makes you want to go to sleep, basically, um, and that's fair. But it's not too difficult to tell what the antecedent of a relative pronoun is. Like I said, they're usually close to each other, pretty close, and they have to have the same gender and number. So that helps out a little bit. But yeah, antecedent just means it literally translates to like comes before. So this relative clause is referring to another word that comes before it, and it's telling us more about those fierce satires. All right, so in the quiz, like 2 weeks ago, this was a long time ago. You guys are probably like, don't even remember this, but I said, what is the antecedent of quas? And I gave you a few options, but satiros is the correct answer there. Yep. So it's the thing that the relative clause is expanding upon. All right. I'm gonna move on ahead to the other one. Let's see. There was one really really big issue with this one. People would start off pretty well with like 100 of the men, 100 men. Either way, Kintum ex viris we can translate as 100 of the men or just 100 men. Either way. Remember, it's another kind of annoying exceptiony kind of thing where x up until now was from, but when it's sandwiched between a number and an ablative, it's going to be of. And yeah, so 100 of the men. You're probably thinking, wouldn't that be like virorum with the genitive? We could say 100 of the men with virorum too, but this is just a way that Romans would uh, express this rather than use a genitive, but you could do both technically. And then we hit quibus cum. And as soon as you hit quibus cum, you should think, okay, I'm firmly in a relative clause now. I'm setting out into a relative clause once I hit quibus cum. Remember, quibus cum, if you flip back to this chart right here, if you look down there, that is just the ablative or dative plural. But when cum is attached, it has to be ablative. It's just like any of our pronouns that gets attached to cum. You're just kind of making two different words one word, but that is ablative. And so, okay, quibus cum, and I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to say, okay, where does this relative clause end? So I can kind of put it in its own little bubble and think of it as semi-separate from the main clause, which is sandwiching the relative clause. So this is one of those more difficult ones because this is a relative clause in the middle. The main clause is surrounding it. So quibus cum, and then I see trons, and I'm like, okay, that's not a verb. So I need a verb. Our relative clauses always have verbs. They're really very much like a sentence, or like their own sentence in that they have their own noun, they have their own verb, they often have their own direct objects, or whatever else they want grammatically. So Maria, that's not a verb. We got to keep moving. Difficilia, that's not a verb. That looks like it's just going to go with Maria. And then Navigavaros. Okay, that's my verb. Hopefully that looks to you like a verb. I guess that could be a noun, but we just got this verb pretty recently. It means to sail, right? And the thing that almost everyone did is like three of you guys avoided this, which was really impressive. I'm trying to think. I don't want to put people on the spot. That's not necessarily, but I remember like okay, like Parker, Daniel, Becca, and then probably a couple more of you guys. So I'm really sorry if I'm leaving you out and you remember you did this correctly. But yeah, some of you guys did great with this. It's going to be 100 of the men, which or with which. I suppose we don't need 100 of the men, which. Yeah, we do need the with. A lot of people were leaving out the with. We need that because if you just think about it, if you just said 100 of the men which you had sailed across the difficult seas, that's like incomplete. It's with which, right? Quibus cum, with which. We're translating the quibus as which or that. Would that work with that? No, I guess it wouldn't. With which. Yep, we got to go with which. Yeah, keep in mind, qui qui quad. It's either going to be that, which, or who or whom, or whose. There's more options once it's actually referring to a person, right? That's when it's a question of if it's who, whose, or whom. Anyway, okay. With which you, so that's what I'm actually talking about. The students I just named. That was the thing that they were lucky enough or prepared enough to not forget. That you want to actually look at the person of the verb in the relative clause. When you look at Navigavaros, I think all of us since last year, like over a year ago, would be able to say, okay, that is second person, right? Second person verb. And so we need to acknowledge that within the relative clause, we got to pull that second person subject out of that verb ending and make it happen in the sentence. And again, maybe 5, 6, 7 of you guys. I can't remember everyone, but this wasn't across the board, but it was pretty close. Where that was, I guess, the biggest issue with this translation. And in a weird way, it's nice to see that you guys are making mistakes because it tells me that you're not, cheating. I don't think any of you guys would do that, but now that we're doing it this way, it's like we can't really know. But anyway, in a weird way, it's like good to see people making understandable mistakes. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, again, all of the teachers were being very lenient right now. We understand how weird this approach is potentially gonna be in terms of you guys actually learning it. But anyway, okay. So with which you, okay, that's the subject of the relative clause. Like I said, the relative clause, it's gonna have its own subject, which is really weird. Yeah, it's like it's existing within another sentence. And it's technically part of the same sentence, and yet it has its own grammatical stuff going on. The 100 of the men, that's not the subject of the relative clause. That's the subject of the main clause. The subject of this relative clause is you. All right, anyway, so with which you had verbed. Navigavaros is pluperfect, right? Pluperfect. So we see that E-R-A at the end. I'm thinking of a pluperfect era. A pluperfect era had been pluperfect. And it's one of those great mnemonics that makes no sense and is not super memorable. Okay, so with which you had sailed. And then we actually have like the meat of the relative clause, trans mare difficilia, across the difficult seas. So yeah, the rest of it's not too bad. It's just easy to like, I don't know, just go along and it's like, oh, maybe you noticed there was a verb there, but you weren't approaching it normally because it's a verb in a relative clause, and so you were thinking, I don't know, you didn't quite. That's a problem like all of my students have had for the past couple of years is just moving a little too quickly and not really zeroing in on that verb ending. I think I might make it a thing now that like verb endings are the most important part of a sentence, and I'll just like always put them in bold because I don't know, they really make a difference. They're super important to you get a lot of information out of them. Anyway, okay, like in terms of this one, we actually get the subject out of it, and then we just have the rest of the main clause. So, um, uh, came to the city, or we're coming to the city. So if we remove the underlined relative clause, this is a pretty simple sentence, just like the other one was. It's just 100 of the men came to the city. That's it. You would probably be a little insulted if that's the sentence I gave you, and that's why like this is a chapter 17 sentence, because it's not just that. We're putting this whole other sentence basically in the middle of it. Again, it's not technically its own sentence, but relative clauses sure behave like a separate individual sentence. Yep, and the connection is the relation between the relative pronoun and its antecedent. The antecedent here was centum ex viris. I'll just lump them all together. It's technically centum is the antecedent, but like 100 of the men, we're talking about the men, right? So even though men is not like grammatically the subject, it's like part of the subject, right? It's almost like centum ex viris is its own little noun phrase, even though technically it contains a nominative, a preposition, and an ablative, which is potentially confusing. And just to be clear, that Wearies is an ablative with a cardinal number. I think that's probably the easiest ablative, honestly. It's that the ablative that it's always to the right of the preposition x, and then to the right of that, I mean, let's see, to the left of that is a number, a cardinal number, right? Cardinal just meaning as in like normal numbers, 1, 2, 3 versus ordinal first, second, third. Okay, guys, I'm gonna let you take your quiz, but I want to say this. I probably should have said it at the beginning of the video. If you look over the next few things that I show you to help you review, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, like maybe I don't know this super well, then I want you to delay taking this quiz. Either come back to it later today, or you can even take it tomorrow. That might not be enticing for you guys. You might be thinking like, I don't want to take a quiz on a Saturday. If you really want to take it on Monday or something, maybe you can email me and I can figure something out. But I just don't want you to take it until you're really ready. Um, yeah, I really admire that you guys are taking these quizzes seriously and putting your stuff away and taking them. Like that's amazing. I mean, I guess we shouldn't expect less. But I just want you guys to actually like have all the information. To the point where if you want to write down some of the stuff on this slide right here, and take it with you into taking the quiz, that's fine. The only thing I don't want you to really have is like this out. If you just like had that on a notebook, that's you're supposed to learn those, right? You're not supposed to. You're supposed to get to the point where you don't have to refer to the words that we are given. That you know you kind of like learn them. So I don't want you to have that out, and I don't want you to have this out. But this, maybe write it down on a little note card and take it with you. These are the new passive endings. And so one big thing that you see, it's I say, what is the voice of these verbs? And then there's a blank. That is something I'm going to ask, and it's the easiest point on the quiz. It's painfully easy because you're going to say it's passive. Yeah. So when I'm asking about the voice of a verb, that might throw you off, and you're like, wait, what? I remember something about a passive voice, but I don't like. Yeah, this is a grammatical voice, right? This is not an actual voice. And when we ask about the voice of verbs, it's always just active or passive. Those are the only two options. And it's the kind of thing like up until literally 2 weeks ago, all of our verbs for a year and a half were active. So I never asked about it. It's not something they teach you in chapter 1, even though it was actually going on the whole time. You just didn't know it. But now we have passive verbs, so I will be asking about it. But unless I'm being real tricky, I'm not going to ask about it if it's an active verb, basically. I guess I'll have to start doing that with my older kids pretty soon, because at this point, the question basically gives away the answer. Kind of in the same way when I ask about mood. If I'm asking about mood, it's probably imperative. I don't ask about the mood of indicative verbs, right? Like 99% of our verbs have been indicative, active. So I don't ask about the mood and the voice of active indicative verbs. That's like our normal standard verb. But now I will ask about the voice of these verbs. Yeah. So I'll still ask person, number, and tense as well. But voice is something you got to look out for. All right. So please know these endings: ris, tour, more, many, tour. I am verb, you are verb, it is verb, we are verb, y'all are verb, they are verbed. And just to be clear, every once in a while there are verbs where like that certain verbs when they are put in this form, they're not actually going to have that ed ending. I'm trying to think of a good example. Yeah, I am taught. I am taught Latin. Okay, I don't say teached, teached. So anyway, I hope it's not misleading for me to continue to use the verbed um, thing that I use all the time. Because yeah, there's plenty of verbs that don't actually get the ed ending. All right. And then those two little notes at the bottom are pretty important actually, because we do have future and imperative passive endings as well, which will be verbed if it's future, and it'll be was or were verbed if it's imperfect. Though that the information right there would be really good to have. Um, for the line with the future endings, I just made all the letters that actually make it future passive as opposed to just present passive. I made them blue, and then I did the same with red for imperfect, to match the respective helping verbs that will show up. So for imperfect, it's just ba like it's always been. Even for imperfect active verbs, it's been ba, right? This whole time, ever since, uh, yeah, for like 2 years. And then future is a little weirder. It's mostly that bi, right? It's in third singular, and first and second plural, it's bi. So the middle ones are bi, but first, second singular, and third plural are a little weird. But Bunt Cake isn't weird. We know Bunt Cake is future, right? All right, and then also these vocab words. Definitely know these. I think I mentioned my older kids. They had a lot of trouble remembering Miskeo was to mix. I don't know why. What else? These aren't too bad. And there's not that many of them, so make sure you know them. Wodeor, be careful about that. Wodeor, it's less likely to be seen. That's a great example of a verb that is not. It's not seened or sawed or seed. Um, is more likely going to be seam or up here. So yeah, seam is similar to the word seen. It's a little different though. It's a little different. And then this. Now that I'm doing the color coding thing, you guys really have all the tools to be able to tell me whatever the case of anything, uh, whatever it is. Um, if you write these out in your notebook, or you hopefully already did, then you can label and maybe use, I don't know, like highlighters or pens or whatever. Just label Huius generis number one. That's genitive. Both of those are genitive forms. Pueris, oh, that's blue, so it's an indirect object. And then magistro, that's an ablative. And we have a ton of different ablatives. So the green just tells us it's one of the ablatives, but you have to go from there. This one happens to be an ablative of anyone by the teacher. Is it ablative of means or agent? And it's agent because teachers are people. Um, yep. Remember, ablative of agent and means are super common now. Every time we have a passive verb, there's a big chance we're going to have an ablative of means or manner, and that ablative is the thing that's actually doing the verbing. Where in this case, the subject is getting verb. The books were read, or will be given. The books of this kind will be given to the boys by the teacher, but few were read. Pauci legabantur. Things that do not have colors are either nouns or verbs, or I guess I don't color conjunctions or adverbs either. But nouns that are not a subject always get a color from now on. Okay, number two, Balkis or I'm just kind of going through these again, so you can see how well you know these, because depending on how you're feeling about me going through these, I'll speed up. I promise. So you actually have time to take this now if you want to. Um, that'll help you decide whether it's like, oh, let me just take this right now. I'm fine. I think I'm actually doing pretty well. Or like, okay, let me do my other classes and then have lunch and then come back and do this before I begin my weekend. Or just more drastically, you can say, let me take it tomorrow, or let me email Mr. Catalanello and maybe set up something on Monday. Let's try to avoid that, but just want you guys to be prepared to actually take this. Okay, in a few hours, Palkis Oris, number two. In a few hours. That's ablative of time when. Ablative of time when. And then Illa Flumina Calaria is our subject. That swift river. Or I'm sorry, those swift rivers, because it's plural. All right, a singular river would just be flumen. Flumina is plural. Began, or I'm sorry, had begun. Coiperant is pluperfect. Era. It's a pluperfect era. Had began. Had began to flow. Fluera. That's one of our new vocab words, right? Had begun to flow. Had begun to flow. Into the huge sea. And mare engains is just an accusative object. of in. Okay, that one's not too bad. Which one of these am I gonna pick? I'm not gonna give you guys any hints about which one I will pick. Uh, are there any that don't have a passive verb? Let's see. No, number four has a passive infinitive. I was about to say number four. Anyway, okay. I might pick anyone. You never know. I don't know. Let's see. So number three, the minds of all listeners. Genitive, right? All listeners. Genitive. Minds of all listeners were moved. I'm skipping all the way to the verb at the end. Move bontour. That is imperfect passive. So were moved. Were verbed. Moved by what? Right? By the third satire. Not the first or the second one, but the third one. Of that renowned poet. Okay, and then number four, quote, this is because. So, because he or she did not send, or I'm sorry, has not sent, or admitted. Sent is okay, but you should just say admit for this. I mean, it looks like admit, right? I'm talking about admisit. Because she has not admitted the students, right? That's a direct object, which is the second word in the sentence, into school. Uh, they desired to be moved. All right, I'm looking at those last two words in number four. They desired to be moved to another city or state. Okay, last one. You're probably like, why are we going over these again? We did this like last video, but anyway, I'm just trying to make sure it helps to review things honestly, especially in the way we're doing it now. I think that it's beneficial. If you're like, you know what, I know number five really well, or you can probably stop and take your quiz at this point, but make sure you don't pause the video on at least not this screen or this screen. All right, last one. Since they were never praised. First three words. Since they were never praised. Were is important because it's la dabontora is imperfect. Uh, they they were beginning in Kipiebont to neglect neglegera even those light studies. Yep. All right, guys. Good luck with your translation quiz. Um, this video is probably ranking up long. I sympathize with you guys having to listen to your teacher's videos 3 times a week. It's probably getting a little redundant, but we got one more month left, so you guys are doing really good with all this. Good luck with the translation quiz. I will have those graded by the end of next week, depending on how many of you take a brief rain check. But yeah, if you think you're ready, go ahead. I'm sure a lot of you are going to do like really good. But just look over these two things and this. So 3 things. Okay, anyway. All right. Talk to you on Monday. Thank you.